I'm Joe O'Connell, and for this week, our class is responsible for reading David Lewis's Paradox in Paradise. In this chapter, he presents 4 objections to modal realism that claim to demonstrate the paradoxical nature of modal realism and then responds to them. Lewis eventually concludes that these objections may have something going for them intuitively, but I think they're not so compelling that I need to count the rejection as any great cost. Because of the time constraints on this presentation, it's not possible to examine and discuss this entire chapter. I would, however, like to think that in some possible world, it is. I have restricted my presentation to the objection which I find the most interesting. Section 2.4 is How Can We Know? In this section, Lewis responds to objections about the seemings of epistemic problems that are claimed to plague modal realism. The biggest of these issues is whether or not discussing possible worlds generates any benefits, as the contents of these possible worlds and their outcomes are unknowable. Summarized more articulately, while possible world semantics does yield truth conditions for possible statements, the truth conditions are such that for any given statement, it is impossible in general to determine whether they are met and hence whether the statement is true. How shall I determine whether A is true in some world or other? Unless it is true in my world, direct inspection is ruled out. Essentially what this means is that if possible worlds are temporally and spatially isolated from our world, there is no way to examine them and see if the proposition is true in some possible world. If the truth value of this proposition is then unknowable, it begins to seem irrelevant. Before addressing that final assertion, Lewis first compares knowledge of possible worlds to knowledge about mathematics. Lewis states that, like mathematics, our knowledge about possible worlds is based on simple and true foundations that can be built upon to grant us knowledge beyond our causal acquaintance and in the absence of direct inspection. Lewis states, "You might grant that we have knowledge of a vast realm of mathematical objects beyond the reach of our causal acquaintance. No causal account covers this part of our knowledge." He goes on to say that, "If you think that all knowledge requires causal acquaintance with the subject matter, I think that is just hasty generalization." He also says that by interacting causally with the world around us, the problem is that we interact mainly with the nearby and unhidden parts. Possible worlds must surely be one of these hidden parts. Like mathematics, it seems possible to interact with them in the absence of causal acquaintance. However, at this point, Lewis is still yet to satisfy the question. If we don't know by causal interaction that other worlds exist, how do we know? Lewis' best response to this question is certainly the way to come by modal opinions is not to inspect the worlds one at a time. Not only because we cannot inspect the worlds at all, but because we know we have to work very fast to run through all of them within a conveniently short time. You might as well think that our knowledge of real numbers comes from inspecting them one at a time. No. Our methods must be general, in both mathematical and modal cases. Certainly when we reason from recombination by means of imaginative experiments, the method is general. We imagine only some salient features and thereby cover an infinite class of worlds, all in one act of imagining. Lewis also responds to what he calls skeptical challenge with the following statements. So what is really wanted? Is it that we must put our firm foundations on still firmer foundations and subsume our general infallible methods under still more general infallible methods ad infinitum? Surely there must be an end sooner or later, and why not sooner? It is that we must be reasonable? Is it that we must prove that this is reasonable? The proof should be a one-liner. It is that we find something to say that would, of necessity, make anyone who heard it become reasonable forthwith. That would be a spell and not an argument. Must we prove from no questionable premises that those who are reasonable will never fall into error? That is not to be expected. Now I'm aware that the purpose of this presentation is to present and explain, but I think I have a few seconds left to offer up some opinions. I feel Lewis does a good job responding to this epistemic objection, but I think he does so in an unsatisfying kind of way. I'm still not convinced that modal realism is valuable theory, as I'm still not convinced that possible worlds have value themselves. Asking hypothetical questions and assigning them their own possible worlds still has no bearing on knowledge in the actual world because I cannot examine these worlds. Imagination is a great tool, but I feel Lewis is putting too much stock into it. With the use of direct inspection, these possible worlds still remain unknowable. Imagining the truth value of a proposition does not give me the truth value of a proposition, and so anything imagined seems irrelevant. I agree with the response of the skeptics that this theory need not be sound, but must attest the response that these objections are not convincing enough for me to adopt his concept, as I feel it may be devastated by this objection.